Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. My name is Jay Davey. I'm going to be explaining to you why pod ownership percentage doesn't matter nearly as much as you think it does. And in fact, the way that it does matter is probably not the way you're applying it, and how you can actually use it to improve your game overall. One of my biggest pet peeves is the amount of podcasters and people online that are serious Supercoach players that talk about pod percentage and ownership as a reason to select or not to select a player, and it's just incorrect most of the time, and in fact it's harmful. So I'm going to run you through a few different examples to show why this doesn't matter, and in fact that it's being applied wrong, and then I'll also talk through a couple of tips that you can take away to then use percentage ownership in the correct way. So in my first example, I'm going to walk you through two different player profiles. The first is Gary Ablett. We're going to predict that he is going to average 90 for the course of the year and have a standard deviation of 10. You can therefore see on the left the distribution of his scores expected for the course of the year. On the right, there is Dustin Martin. We're going to predict an average of 100, a standard deviation of 10, same as Gary. And then you also see a normal distribution of his expected outcomes for the course of the year. Now, if Gary Ablett is highly owned, say 100,000 people own him, and Dustin Martin is just owned by me, this is a really, really good outcome for me, and I want to find these every single time. Some people will say actually taking Dustin Martin is a higher risk because he is less owned, but that's just not wrong. On this next page, what I've done is take the, basically compared the expected outcomes between the two players and plot it onto one line. On the left of the zero are all the scenarios, or all the probable scenarios, where Gary Ablett scores more than Dustin Martin, and on the right of that zero are all the times where Dustin Martin wins. When you calculate the probability under the curve to the left of zero, you get Gary Ablett winning with these player profiles about 25%, and the other 75% of the year Dustin Martin wins. So please tell me why owning Gary Ablett would somehow make him less risky when you lose 3/4 of the time. It just doesn't work like that. Now, the bigger pet peeve is that people don't seem to understand that it doesn't matter at a player-by-player level either. What you actually care about is team average and team outcome. So what I'm going to show you in this next example is what would happen if I could find 10 more Dustin Martins, or 10 Dustin Martins, Dusty 1, Dusty 2, Dusty 3, etc. And you picked the highly owned Gary Ablett. You picked just like everyone else. When you average these up and then basically map the distribution of outcomes you would expect across the course of the year, what happens is the following. You see how small the left of zero gets. In this scenario, I've even written it down here. Here we go. The Gary Abletts score more 1.27% of the time on average than the Dustin Martins. You tell me that winning less than 2% of the time is somehow less risky because everyone owns him. What? It doesn't make any sense. Okay, but you may be saying, Jay Davey, you've picked a very skewed example where Gary averages 10 less. What happens if they both average the same and they both look the same? Doesn't ownership percentage matter then? So this is what the two curves look like. They're the same curve, except Dusty's looks better in the yellow and black. Now, does ownership percentage now matter? Absolutely not. Let's assume, for this thought experiment, that Supercoach is broken down into two phases of the game. Everything that happens now pre-round one, all the team selection, you're min-maxing your players, whatever it is, and then everything post-round one, trading, upgrading, etc. And let's assume that I am the sole Dustin Martin owner, and you and 1,000 other people own Gary Ablett. When round one hits, it's a 50-50 coin flip as to which one of these players was the better start. Let's assume that if you pick the right player, you win, and the other person's knocked out. So, at the start of the year, we flip the coin 50-50. 50% of the time, Dustin wins, which means 50% of the time, I win Supercoach. I win Supercoach every second year, if this is how the game was played. But what happens if I lose the coin flip? Well, then you and the other 100,000 coaches still have to play out the rest of the year. So in this one player that has the same distribution model, basically my odds of winning Supercoach for a given year is 50%, and yours is 1 in 200,000. How is that less risky? It's much, much worse of an outcome than you expect on average every single time. So don't use ownership to pick players. It doesn't make any sense, and in fact, it's probably detrimental to your side. Now, apart from just the pure maths and probability behind it, there's a few more reasons why ownership percentage is just a really bad number to use. Firstly, let's talk about the fact that when you're aiming for number 1 overall or even top 100, the ownership percentage is really bad because it doesn't reflect the players owned by the top 100 or so, the best players in the league. What it represents is everyone, including those that will finish below 100,000. Why would you want to be selecting the same players as them? You're not competing against them. You don't want to have pods or differences against them. It just doesn't make any sense. And if you're a league player, which is the other group, so say you're like, JDB, I don't care about overall, I care about league, well then, even more of a reason not to use the coach-owned percentage. You care about the 17 other people in your league and who they own and who they're targeting, not the most percentage owned for everyone else. Why are you looking at the list? It just doesn't make any sense. It is one of the most useless numbers that Supercoach Gold provides. It is heavily overweighted in people's opinions when evaluating risk of players, risk of teams, and it just doesn't matter in the way that you think at all. Now, I did say there were a couple of ways you can actually use it to improve your Supercoach game, but unfortunately, it's not really for those that are vying out for the top few spots. Where it is useful is if you're one of those more casual Supercoach players that's looking to try and improve on their weak areas. So if we go back to that model where you assume that Supercoach is effectively build your team and then the season itself, if you're really good at building your team, but then really bad at trading across the season, well, across the course of the season, you should be tracking the players that are getting more owned, that people are picking up, that people are trading in, and follow those trading patterns to improve your team. Conversely, if you're really good at trading throughout the year, but really bad at picking a starting squad, use ownership percentage then, right? Because then you can basically mitigate your weakness and then focus on your strength. Now, unfortunately, using these types of tactics isn't going to take you from 50,000 to top 1,000, but it will start to move you in the right direction. Realistically, if you want to be aiming for those top spots, you have to be amazing at both parts of the game, and you can't just be relying on following the crowd to outperform, because it's just not how it works from a mathematical or game perspective. So I really hope this is the last time someone tells me that they are or aren't picking a player because of percentage ownership. It just is not a good way to play the game, and please don't do it anymore. Thanks.